Welcome to the second session of the Grace Paley Symposium. I want to invite you to visit the Hirshon Suite. There's an exhibition of a Grace Paley documentary, as well as an exhibit of photography, 2 yearboxes. One yearbox that was made by the women in the Skidmore class of 1969, a way of thinking outside the box. The other is a yearbook of 2015 of Parsons students, and there's also an exhibit of photography on the wall. So after the session, please go by and have a look at the exhibition. And welcome. I want to thank Luis Jaramillo and Laura Cronk. Luis is the director of the Creative Writing Program, and Laura is the associate director, for all their help in putting together this writing panel of Paley-inspired poetry and prose. So, Laura, to you.
Thank you so much, Terry. Hi, I'm Laura Cronk, and it's an honor to be here with all of you, students of writing, activists, and serious thinkers of all kinds, celebrating the legacy of Grace Paley. Grace Paley is an important model for all of us at the New School, and certainly at the writing program. Her work is frequently taught and is invaluable for studying the art of paying attention. Has anyone paid better attention than Grace Paley to moment consciousness, to the sounds of people talking to each other, to the sounds of voices that are missing from public conversation, to the splendor of both the natural and human-made world, to the little disturbances of man that women's lives have depended on, and to the responsibilities of both the writer as both an artist and an activist. All of us here who are writers are forever students of writing, and we look to Paley to understand what true artistic and moral courage is. In our program, we interpret political writing broadly. The very act of paying attention in the society we live in is an act that combats materialism, racism, sexism, militarization, and many other engines of injustice. It is passivity that is in part responsible for these systematic oppressions. The artist, in waking herself up in order to produce her own work, in waking up others who recognize in her work something true, are important agents of change. You're about to hear from students of writing at the New School. Their biographies are listed on the program you have. They will read in alphabetical order by first name, and I'll mention that Yves Lalonde is not able to be with us today. I'm very proud to present these fine writers to you today, who are operating in a space that Grace Paley helped create. And I'm going to read one of my favorite poems of Grace Paley's. Oh, is that Yves? Yves Lalonde is here, which is fantastic news. We have a full program. I'm going to read one of Grace Paley's poems before turning the podium over to our student writers. This is her poem, Responsibility. It is the responsibility of society to let the poet be a poet. It is the responsibility of the poet to be a woman. It is the responsibility of the poet to stand on street corners giving out poems and beautifully written leaflets, also leaflets they can hardly bear to look at because of the screaming rhetoric. It is the responsibility of the poet to be lazy, to hang out and prophesy. It is the responsibility of the poet not to pay war taxes. It is the responsibility of the poet to go in and out of ivory towers and 2-room apartments on Avenue C and buckwheat fields and army camps. It is the responsibility of the male poet to be a woman. It is the responsibility of the female poet to be a woman. It is the poet's responsibility to speak truth to power, as the Quakers say. It is the poet's responsibility to learn the truth from the powerless. It is the responsibility of the poet to say many times, there is no freedom without justice, and this means economic justice and love justice. It is the responsibility of the poet to sing this in all the original and traditional tunes of singing and telling poems. It is the responsibility of the poet to listen, to gossip, and pass it on the way storytellers decant the story of life. There is no freedom without fear and bravery. There is no freedom unless earth and air and water continue and children also continue. It is the responsibility of the poet to be a woman, to keep an eye on this world and cry out like Cassandra, but be listened to this time. Please welcome Alexis Zangi.
Laura asked us to put together a few words on what it means to write politically. And sometime last week, I read that Missouri was trying to ban the purchase of snacks and red meat and seafood by food stamp recipients. And my immediate reaction was one of anger. It was another disciplinary measure foisted upon the working poor for no other reason than their being so. I had been on food stamps once too, and used the money to buy red meat. I slow-cooked chuck roast and ate it with frozen spinach for a few meals every month when I felt weakest from my anemia. It did not feel undeservedly decadent. It felt like nutrition. The job of a writer is to render a foreign experience native to the reader. It is to push through that anger and come out not just intelligible, but compelling on the other side of it. It is to facilitate empathy and to allow the reader to sit in another's shoes. And a good deal of our failures, as citizens, as activists, as legislators, as people, come from an ignorance towards the needs and experiences of others, and a refusal to push through to that other side. Perhaps if members of the Missouri State Legislature had read Upton Sinclair or Charles Dickens or Grace Paley, perhaps they would not be so quick to condemn the purchase of such extravagances as chuck roast and canned tuna with public monies. Or perhaps there is just more work for us to do. I'm going to read a few pieces from my thesis. Chuck bought us at the auction with money he carried in a duffel bag the color of his hair, and tended to our bones ever since. He pushed the pieces of our porch back into each other, rejoined with caulk and cement, and he dusted the walls and the chandeliers with his T-shirts, lit candles in buckets of gravel, lived on bagged potatoes. There had been others before her and others that left, and part of Chuck's favorite, the blonde bird, hung heavy over us, over all of us. These sisters lived out their lives with Chuck, with an unknown absence made palpable. But it was Ginny who planted seeds, gave the chickens a coop and a farmer's feed, not scavenged bits of bread. Chuck could salvage a whole world from a relic, but Ginny could grow one fresh from the ground. The nights were becoming harder for Chuck. More than once he shook and twitched for minutes at a time in his bed and onto the floor. With Sarah Beth or Ginny curled by his side, never both at once, for that was a young man's game in his words, he would run his rough fingers over the smooth growth at the nape of his neck. He'd grown his hair out and taken to wearing undershirts to hide it from Sarah Beth and Ginny. It wasn't like him. Chuck demanded a nurturing from the women who came to stay in the Stu Gray house. Like an animal playing dead, Chuck played weak, just for that minute, just for that night, just to elicit that reaction. It was a game, the inverse of a puppy mouthing at its littermate. But unlike the sisters, the lump on Chuck's neck was a growth that he couldn't contain. It was something he couldn't control or manipulate or make wild or cut down. It was there, rising and moving down his vertebrae, pushing against his pillow. While Sarah Beth's sleeping mouth grew moist on his chest hairs, Chuck held his breath. The lump felt louder, for sure. The moon and the street lamp met on the bedspread, crossing Sarah Beth's body with slivers of cool white and electric orange. Chuck ran his gnarled fingers across the expanse of her shoulders once more, and his nails were so worn, they sat nearly convex in their calloused beds. He counted Sarah Beth's multiplying freckles. He'd tracked the summer with their fluctuations since her arrival, and by July, she'd assumed most of Ginny's duties, from beating the blankets to cracking his beers. Her cheesecloth skin had turned olive, and the freckles more than doubled. Chuck pulled himself from the bed, ran cold water in the tub, splashed it on his face, and it was so hot he felt his innards stick together, lungs to rib cage, brain to bone. A near lifetime of being feral had left him skeptical of any authority but his own. Wouldn't let anyone but himself cut his hair, hadn't paid taxes in years, and when a tooth grew infected, he tied a piece of slack twine to it and made Ginny slam a door to pull it out. He considered giving the lump similar treatment. but its proximity to the spine made it undesirable. But as his fingers ran over the street shade in the moonlight, and a clean, straight razor made its presence known, Chuck figured it was as good a time as any and sat as upright as he could in the bathtub. Thank you.
Let's put that as high as it'll go. Hi, my name is Audrey Green, and Laura had asked us to say a few words on a few questions, and the one I chose to answer was how writing and activism coincide for me as a writer. They don't, actually. I do not come to the paper with an agenda, and I try to stay as far away from conveying my personal beliefs on paper. I think that'll come through regardless. If you consider activism just an act of being and living and writing, activism, writing in and of itself is an act of activism. So that's how I feel the two coincide, just by the act of writing. I am being an activist. So this is a piece called Her Day. The kettle was screaming. The slight jet of steam spurting from its mouth was negligible in the already sweltering kitchen. The room smelled of summer soil and used copper, skirts tucked into belts, hair pinned up and pushed behind ears, brows glistening. The girls chatted amongst themselves. In the din, the wine went unnoticed. Abby, in the corner, Alma did not bother to follow the command with a stern glance. Her arm continued to rise and fall rhythmically, wrenching tufts of feathers from gander flesh. Her wrinkled skin became taut with every expert motion. Abby, the eldest daughter, looked up from her cutting board and glanced around the room. Brushing the stray graying hairs from her face, she then rushed to the burners, dimmed the flames, and sighed. Who started the coffee? She patted her chin with an apron. The twins, Nina and Dolores, giggled. Their palms kneaded dough in tandem as they discussed the absurdity of their neighbor Fiona's new dress pattern and how oddly it framed her pregnant body. Chaz, Abby's daughter, frowned as her fingers nimbly polished mushroom caps over a metal basin. She and Abby had been discussing how Peter, a lawyer's son, had recently started negotiations with Alpa to marry her. Only Diana, the second youngest of Alma's daughters, stopped her activity to speak up. She rested the mallet on the lamb and spun around to face the stove. Oh, gee, I wonder who. Diana pretended to stretch her arms over her head, pointing her thumb discreetly towards the opposite corner where Toby sat, peeling carrots, pretending not to hear a word. Her fingers were still plump with baby fat and worked the peeler clumsily over the rough orange surfaces. Abby walked over to Toby, picking up a paring knife along the way. She fingered the blade as she knelt down. She then patted the little girl on the cheek, raised her chin, and looked her in the eye. Toby, did you start the water? The whites of the child's eyes were like crescent moons below her dark irises. She nodded them hesitantly and then parted her mouth to protest. But they told me to. There's no reason to blame them. It's okay, but you should know. She will learn. Alma's voice cut through the room. She pinched out a final feather and turned to look at Toby. Toby, the coffee water is not boiled until after we eat, but no harm done. Toby smiled at Alma, who raised the corners of her mouth slightly. She then turned her gaze to the other girls, who looked down in response. This is her day. Don't tease her. Diana sighed and returned to pulverizing the meat. She grasped the mallet with both hands and rained blows upon the slab of pink tissue. Red juices welled in each place of impact. Under her breath, she retorted, "We weren't being mean, and you're one to talk." "How much time, Maggie?" Alpa's voice echoing from the hall, clamored against the hanging pots and pans, almost causing them to shake. "Soon," Alma shouted back. Nina and Dolores, who had been giggling at a mustache drawn on Dolores' face in flour, froze. "Don't let Alpa see you like that," Alma warned. Dolores rubbed her hand across her face, smearing the white around her mouth rather than removing it. "Here, use this. It'll be easier like this." Abby picked up a carrot and swiped the paring knife across its surface. She then handed it to Toby, who attempted to do the same. Abby patted the girl on the cheek again when she had achieved a good pace. "So do you think Alpa will go for it? I mean, I hear he's impotent, so..." Chaz ran handfuls of parsley beneath the faucet. "Like that matters," Diana called over her shoulder. "Abby, what was it like? Does it hurt?" Nina began rolling the dough into a snake. Alma shushed the girls. Stop that. Not in front of Toby now. Every other word was syncopated by the sound of a knife hitting wood. The room was suddenly filled with the scent of onions. Chaz sniffed. It can't hurt as bad as... Diana, I said, not now. Alma had placed the gander on the counter and was removing offal and entrails. Toby, come here. I'll show you something. Toby placed the small blade on her stool and ran over to be beside the old woman. She tugged at her skirt, wrapping the hem around her little fingers. Alma, why does Alpa call you Maggie and we call you Alma? Do you have two names? Can I have two names? I want to be named Beatrice, too. Abby dumped the heaps of sliced vegetables beside Chaz into a large stew pot. Alma is short for All Mama. Alma is the great mother. Like Alpa, that's short for All Papa, the papa of all. Someday, when you have lots of kids and they have kids, you will be called Alma, too. I don't want to be Alma. I want to be Beatrice. Toby, pay attention, Alma directed. She first threaded a thick darning needle with black yarn. She then angled the bottom of the gander down to let Toby watch as she stitched the gaping hole. This is how it is done. That looks scary, Toby shook her head. Maggie, come. Everything is ready. Alpa's voice shook the room once again. Alma wiped her hands across her apron, smearing it with rust-colored residue and blood. She then produced a glass from her pocket, brought a bottle of brown liquor from the cabinet, and poured the liquid. She handed it to Toby and gestured for her to drink. It will make things better. It smells funny. The room had grown considerably quieter. Just drink it. Drink it, Toby, Abby chimed in. Toby drank and winced. Alma pushed the glass against her small mouth so she would finish the contents completely. The old woman then wiped the little girl's face with her apron, creating another brown streak across the fabric surface. That was yucky. Alma smashed the glass on the ground. She stooped slowly to pick up the largest shard and examined it. It glowed amber, lit only by the burner flames. Come with me, said Alma. She took Toby by the hand and led her out. The other girls remained still, watching as the child exited. Abby then went to the stove and raised the flame beneath the kettle. Diana proceeded to pound the meat. Chaz went to the corner to peel the remaining carrots. Abby stirred the bubbling pots above the stove. Nina and Dolores twisted and knotted tubes of dough. It was not long before the room was filled with screams again. In the din of activity, the girls tried hard not to notice.
Bean Haskell can't be here today, so I'm going to read a poem of hers and also her statement. Refugee status. I've been walking the cobblestone streets again, wound by a dream. The lethargy in these legs stifles and stifles. Just one brick on this block is more real estate than I can afford, so I continue to walk through life as a member of the you can look but you can't touch class. But even this bric-a-brac collection of hazy memories rounds my shoulders in guilt over the wealth I have collected. I'm rich, I cry, so filthy rich I cannot stand to sit still on my own side of the tracks with a single unwashed dish or the what-have-yous that put me in my place, and my place pleads poverty, guiltily. Then there are those accumulations that weigh you down with wealth so thick that even filth, let alone baths, could not rescue you. A whiff of tomatoes that taste like the real thing. Phrase in the cunning bastard tongue you've long renounced, but sticks its cilia through your pores like congealed sweat, gathers the loosest chemise that could be found to dawn through another sordid summer's humidity, but with none of the humility. Today it was a honeysuckle bush. As a child, I would pick them up and drink mild sweetness from the bud, bottoms up, the way you liked me at that age, the way you'd take me still had I not dreamt of all the breath a belly could behold when at last empty, had I not cut your tongue from my mouth and learned, however belatedly, to speak. She wrote to me today. In terms of the question of what it's like to be a political writer today, I'll be brief and say that discourse is ailing, and the irony of those who quote that one cannot dismantle the master's house using the master's tools and then proceed to do so is palpable and painful. And in my work, I make a call for a reevaluation of movement identity and peace building. And now please welcome Emma Greer.
So I'll just say a brief word about politics and literature and the power I think literature has to inspire empathy and understanding in a reader. At my day job, I work in human rights, and one of our biggest challenges is trying to forever prevent the US from committing torture again, and also to hold those accountable who are responsible for that torture. And one of the biggest challenges is getting people to understand that the people who were tortured are also human. And it's that fundamental attempt to strip away human dignity that we can't allow our society ever to perpetrate. And I think that one of the most powerful ways to get people to understand this is to tell the stories of the people who were tortured and to allow people to relate to that kind of suffering in ways that is not obvious for them. And that's a big challenge, but that's where I think literature is important. It's getting the voices of suffering out into the world so that people can see themselves in the suffering of others and start to realize that collectively we all have a responsibility to prevent that from happening. This is called Webster County, 1952. Melinda had nearly sat down when Jim whipped around to pull out her chair. "At least give me a chance to be a gentleman," he winked. She blushed. "Thank you," she said, placing the napkin on her lap. Jim ordered the ribeye, well done, and Melinda had the chicken a la king. She never drank, but he persuaded her to try a bit of red wine, something he had built up a taste for in France during the war. He slid the glass toward her. "For the lady," he said. "Jim, Melly, a little drop won't bite." She took a sip and swiftly dabbed her lips with her napkin so he wouldn't see her grimace. "Well," she said, "isn't that something?" "It's something," Jim grinned. Melinda thought it kind of him to take her out. They hadn't been to a restaurant for years, maybe not since before Tommy was born. Still, she found it a little unsettling to see so many strangers all dining in one place, the couples leaning in close and talking low, trying for romance and intimacy, but dressed to be seen. "You look very nice this evening, Melly," Jim said. "Well, I wish I had managed to finish hemming that new dress." Her gaze lingered on a woman at the next table, radiant in a sharp royal blue number. "Nothing wrong with this one." Jim gave her a kind smile. "Always been one of my favorites on you." Melinda smiled back. "Thank you," she said, eager to change the subject. She took a sip of water. "Tommy and I went blueberry picking this afternoon. Should be plenty for a pie." "That right," Jim said. "It's good he's helping you. Just so long as I don't see my son out in that field wearing a bonnet," he added. "What? Of course not." "I'm just teasing Melly," Jim said. He took a bite of his steak. Melinda concentrated on cutting her salad into manageable bites. "I was thinking," he said, "it's been a while since we've been on the road. I kind of miss our traveling days." "Living out of that tin can on wheels? I'm quite fond of our little house," Melinda said, wondering if she should be alarmed. "Well, now, I don't mean to go through all that again," Jim smiled. "Don't look so pale. I mean, we should take a little vacation, show Tommy some sights. Maybe drive down to Eureka Springs." Melinda said. "Haven't been there in a while." She thought about riding down the bumpy mountain roads, the heat and humidity stewing in their tiny car, the hours away from her kitchen, her garden, her quiet home. "It might be nice for you and Tommy to take a boys' trip." "That's no fun," Jim said. "It's for all of us together, as a family." Melinda could see it was important to him. "Maybe in the fall," she said. "I was thinking even sooner. You're going to love it, Melly." He looked off distantly, smiling to himself. "Yep, it'll be good to get away." Melinda forced a smile. She lowered her fork daintily so it wouldn't clang against the porcelain. Jim waved at the waiter for another glass of wine. "Don't you think it's getting a little late, dear? Those back roads get so dark," Melinda said. "Ah, come on, it's an occasion." She pondered this. "Oh? Yes, ma'am," Jim said. "We're celebrating." "What for? Taking a vacation?" "Well, sure, but not just. Bigger." Melinda felt a flash of worry that she had forgotten an important date or tuned out while her husband shared a bit of good news. "Yes, of course," she said. Jim took a gulp of wine. He grabbed her hand and looked into her eyes. "We're celebrating this," he said. "You. Leaving the house, getting all dolled up, moving on." "Oh." Melinda moved her hand closer to her plate, and Jim released his grip. She'd lost her appetite, but the dish cost $6 and she couldn't let it go to waste. "Melly," Jim said, "you can't mourn forever." Melinda felt hot and constrained. She wanted away from all these people. "Well, wasn't that delicious?" she muttered. "Such a treat. Looks like you enjoyed your steak." "Melly, I'm not done yet." "Oh, I'm sorry. Should I ask to see the desserts?" "God damn it, I'm not done talking to you. There's things you ought to hear." Melinda cringed as he raised his voice. "Not here," she whispered, "in the car." "Melinda, you need to accept that that one child is gone. It's time we got on from it now." Melinda stood up slowly and smoothed out her skirt. "Excuse me, I think I need some air. I'll just wait outside while you settle up." She walked out and took a few steps toward the car, then stopped. She was sure Jim hadn't locked the doors, but she didn't want to sit in the passenger seat and wait. She paced in small steps across the pavement as her thoughts careened. How could he possibly think this was the time and place? She felt deceived. The first time he'd taken her out in years, and it had all been a ruse. What did he mean to prove? He'd made known his detachment for months. It wasn't up to her to teach him to grieve. Down the square, she could see Sailor's funeral home, glowing faintly white beside the street lamp. She bet they had tulips blooming now by the porch. They always kept that lawn so nice. The last time she went anywhere near there, it was winter, when the walkways were soggy and gray with salt. It would have suited her if they'd just left the ice and granted her the dignity of having something to slip on, an excuse to crawl through those doors on her knees. Without Jim there to steady her, she would have never made it through. And here they were, back on the square for the first time since the funeral, and Jim still trying to steady her in the best way he knew how. He did mean well. Maybe she'd overreacted. She could have waited for the check at least or excused herself for the ladies' room. She wrung her hands. She couldn't go back inside. She wandered over to the bench beside the entrance and sat down carefully, ankles crossed. When Jim emerged from the restaurant a short while later and whirled to face her, Melinda could see his temper boiling. "Never, never walk out on me in public," he said, pulling her up by the elbow. She felt her face flush. So that was that. She turned her back and walked briskly toward the car. As they drove in silence, she fixed her eyes on the world beyond them, gazing as far as she could into the night sky, at the stars clustered like flecks of frost or tiny white petals, baby's breath. That night, Melinda waited until he fell asleep to climb into bed. She lay awake and felt numbness engulf her, as it had every night since Lilly was born dead. When Jim turned toward her in his sleep, she recoiled. Drifting into an uneasy half-consciousness, Melinda kept small and stiff against the edge of the bed to avoid his touch, this man who understood nothing of mothers and daughters and love. Thank you.
So my name is Tim Vite Jones. And Laura asked via email last night, what injustice or issue am I most interested in addressing in my writing? Which right now every day is a very loaded question, particularly for me. Simply, I'm interested in exploring why I am American, why some ancestors were brought here against their will in one of the greatest atrocities in human history, while others came of their own volition for a better way of life, and how I'm more rewarded by society and as a writer for ignoring the former and celebrating the myth of meritocracy associated with the latter. My work explores what I deal with daily, and what those I love deal with daily. Racism, sexism, homophobia, the fluidity of language and masculinity, and faith and spirituality. As of late, my work has focused on how to heal from the systematic eradication of Black and Indigenous populations in this country. It is like this place is wired to kill Black and brown and red bodies, to break women, to silence voices in favor of power and comfort. So I write to combat that. I scream about it with every fiber of my vocal cords because I cannot sleep. And my pen is much louder than my big mouth. Maybe if someone tells me how we can heal without justice, I can write about oceans and prairies and butterflies. Until then, I carry this mantle and this pen. The first piece that I'd like to share was inspired by my students. So when I'm not a student here, I teach. And I went to the National Black Theater on 125th Street. I took my students there to see the Black Lives Matter exhibit. They're high school students, and they were interested of their own volition in exploring this theme and this movement that's happening now through a magazine they run at the school. And when you walk into this exhibit, there is a ancestral altar placed on the floor in caution tape as a homage to Ayanna Jones Stanley. She was a 7-year-old girl from Detroit who was shot in the head by a police officer during a raid in 2000 while she slept on the couch. Her uncle was wanted for something. There was a no-knock warrant, and it was filmed by a police TV show. And when I walked in, I didn't go there intending to write. I just went there so my students could see some art. And we came back, and the next class, we sat to pair ourselves with a work of art that we saw. And I asked them to write in response. And when I give a prompt as an instructor, in order to build trust, I've responded to the prompts myself, and this is what happened. For Ayanna, perhaps she dreamt of princes, castles, forests, fairies, her future queendom. Perhaps she clutched a teddy bear with fragrant fur. Perhaps she had visions of lavender fields, high Ferris wheels. Perhaps in this dream, a prince arrived at that couch. Perhaps this princess expected to be awakened by her royal father. Perhaps in some other world, a king kissed her forehead instead of a bullet. In December, I was asked to be a part of a political action that took place at BAM, of all places. Vijay Iyer is a jazz musician who had 3 nights there, and he asked us to stage a die-in and movement, because most of the people were dancers that I was there with, for his 3-night run. And I wrote this in response. It is common to be given water and food while nailed to a cross, to be taunted or conversed with until the weight of labored lungs swells above the diaphragm, until the muscles needed to breathe fatigue, until reflex quiets to stillness. These die-ins, where we lay stacked close, bodies upon bodies, mirror the bellies of ships that brought us here. We were chained then, limbs joined by a common reality. When one limb jerked, the whole community felt it. When one of us died, our movements chained. We all pulled the weight. It took momentum to accomplish anything, be it rest or waking. Dead bodies in chains can't be ignored. We all feel them as we move toward daily plantations, as we rise in this house. We lay in public, like sarcophagi, adorned royally, proclaim our humanity. We place ourselves on exhibit, a museum of abducted bodies. Breathing is labored, if we can breathe at all. The last piece I'm going to share has to do with being diasporic. And as my cousin Howard Treadwell says, be it the love or the hate or the rape that brought us here, those of us of African descent who are born in this country or in the Caribbean are not just of African descent. So this is a series of poems from a book called Orphans, which is about reconciling that identity of disconnection and displacement and heritage. And I'm going to read a mix of these sections. When you are the grandchild of black folk with a German Jewish last name, there are bound to be a lot of questions asked. The inheritance we claim is not monetary. You can't quantify the value of culture. During assimilation, they say language is the first to go. We had ours stripped twice over. African tongues bent to the king's speech, native tongues bent to civilized speak. Next is the drum, too much bass and power and magic and unity and rhythm and prayer. Then goes religion, then comes religion, and if you remember the old one, you can't speak to your gods in the language they know. Last is the food. We survived off scraps or what was cheap or what we could grow when they stole the good land. The inheritance we claim ain't only from Africa and Turtle Island. Sometimes it's from Ireland and Germany too. I know no Mandinka, no Algonquin, no German, no Irish, no Hebrew, no Yiddish, just this colonial patois wrapped around my tongue like a corn husk, like a yam skin, like a potato skin, like unleavened bread. Maternal inheritance may have passed over. Paternal inheritance may have been written out of history, but we are still the finest smiths that make something out of what others call nothing. We don't just make something out of nothing. We make art out of our inheritance, as broken and destitute as it may appear. We survive with love as our language, with children as the drums we pray to our ancestors with. I've seen many a bembe at Sunday dinner. We create traditions anew, to find the ones we lost, to find the ones stolen, to find the ones taken, to find the ones ignored, to find the ones disowned, to find the ones hidden. We create to remember, and remember to create. Thank you.
I want to thank our readers once again. I wonder if we could have another round of applause for their fine work. And thanks to all of you for being here and for coming. Terry Gordon asked me to put out the call to the audience to see if anyone would like to say anything about what they've just heard or how they feel writing and converge, writing and politics converge, especially when thinking about Grace Paley. I think, are these microphones on the sides? Yeah, they are. Does anyone have a comment that they would like to make? No. Okay. Well, thank you again so much. And it was an honor to be here with you.